very interesting, though, hearing almost all of you are saying what a lot of people say, which is it's inevitable that you'll have restructuring, and this is just good money after bad. But what is striking is when you talk to people, that solution looks better the further you are from the situation. And the closer you get to it, I suspect if we spoke to George Osborne, even privately, or if we spoke to I was in Athens last week, the closer you are to what the implications of that would be on the ground for the Greek banks, for Irish banks, the harder that looks. And even if everyone agrees, and I don't know many economists who don't think it will eventually happen in the case of Greece, no one wants it to happen tomorrow or today.
But delaying pain
and I just wonder whether all of you, do you actually all think it should happen tomorrow, that we should just get it over with?
We've got to see the world as it is, not as we would like it to be. For example, Joe mentioned Iceland. All Irish politicians were saying last year, oh, you wouldn't want to be Iceland. That's a terrible basket case. You wouldn't want to go near Iceland. So I decided to go up and have a look at what a basket case felt like. And I went up to Reykjavik, and it really struck me. The only people who were really worried in Reykjavik were English bankers in the Hilton in Reykjavik looking for their money back. And I put this to the finance minister, and he looked at me and says, but we have no money. It's all gone. We can give them fish if they like. Now, but, you know, he didn't mean to be funny. What he was saying is, this is what we have. The money is gone. I also asked a taxi driver. He said, my mortgage is in yens, but Tokyo is very far away. So the point was, you know, it's a mindset thing. You get your head around the change. The Icelandics have said, okay, the money's gone. So the bankers, you can queue up behind. Like in any situation where the money is gone, you can't magic the money. Unless, of course, that's what my kids say, Daddy, magic that. Unless, of course, the ECB magics the money, right, and prints it. But then the problem is that we're back to this basic idea that countries like Ireland and Greece and Portugal and Spain, we need to grow quicker than Germany, because that's the objective of the EU, that we will have a better standard of living. Okay? The only way we can go quicker than Germany is to have the Googles and the Microsofts and the Facebooks in Ireland, which we have. But and that's a fantastic liberation for us. But to do that, we need to ensure that the average Irish person isn't incredibly burdened with what are odious debts that we didn't take out. So we are very happy as a nation to pay our national debt, which paid for our roads and our hospitals and our schools and all that. But we're not prepared to pay for the gambling debts of Deutsche Bank. That's a simple issue. And I think the EU elite don't seem to realize that they can actually go onto the good side, to the side of the angels almost, by actually just looking at it in a different way and saying, do you know what? And the thing about the Deutsche Bank's balance sheet is it going to be made immeasurably easier by the ECB printing money. End of story. Which is what the Fed is doing. And so the German taxpayer, you don't have to pay. You just have a printer's bill in Frankfurt at the end.
But this is, look, the argument against this...
That's true.
Give me a guarantee for that.
No, you don't need a guarantee, just trust me.
But let me say this. I think, yeah, the failure of Greece is the one topic, but moral hazard is not a theory right now. We are talking about a banking system which tries...
Moral hazard being the fact that people start being irresponsible because they get bailed out.
Especially the private banks. And I agree with Mr. Stieglitz, we have to make them accountable and responsible for what they have done. That means restructuring of debt. Recently I met Lord Blankfein, which I know well from my time in the US, and we had a discussion about normality in the banking system. We talked about Mr. Ackerman and his new strategy to match the investment banking with some retail bankers, which he recently bought. And so I asked Lord, what do you think about that strategy? And he looked at me with great eyes and said, Gabor, what do you mean by normal? To invest real money for real people, for real investments in real countries? That's too risky for me. Gabor, I want to see my money back every night. That's his way of explaining his business and his show to make people understand that he sees himself as a risk taker. That's okay, but then he has to take the risk in this case. This kind of banks have taken too much risk in their books, and now we have to bring them to the table. That would help a lot for the European idea and for this country.
Just to be devil's advocate here, this is precisely the argument that was had before Lehman's. And those who are very scared of a restructuring, which includes most of the politicians in Europe at the moment, rightly or wrongly, are worried that having effectively turned all the private debt we had in the crisis into sovereign debt, if you start saying, oh, actually, the sovereign debt's not going to be repaid either, these governments aren't going to repay it, you start taking us back to that brink that we were discussing a year ago in the global financial system.
The market already thinks that, doesn't it? I mean, the market is already pricing that into the bonds of Greece and Portugal and Spain.
They thought it was all priced in, and then what
Board
happened?
members of Deutsche Bank told me we are prepared. We have it already. We have to do it in our books, this government bonds from Greece, with a haircut of 30-something%, and all the private banks, they have to do
that's
it.
right. They've got a market-to-market, haven't they?
Capitalism do these people not understand? You know, you lent money to somebody. As Joe said, the guy who lends should be slightly more aware of the risk than the guy who's borrowing. The guy who's borrowing hasn't got the cash anymore. That's it. I mean, and the more we dress it up and the more we turn it around and the more we say, well, we projected out another 30 years or 40 years or whatever, the less we get to the essence of the crisis, which is that the ECB, and we, I mean, there's co-responsibility in all this. We, in Ireland, are responsible for the debts that many of us individually took out. But equally, the lender is responsible for lending. I mean, the ECB presided over a financial crack house. You know, the French and German banks are owed over 900 billion euros by the Irish, Portuguese, Greek and Spanish banks together. They're not getting that money back, and they know it.
See, what I'd also emphasize is this is a negative sum, not a zero-sum game. Because the way they're thinking about it now is going to stymie growth. You emphasize the importance of growth. The policies right now that are being imposed on Greece, Ireland, are designed to kill these countries. And the only way that you're going to get prosperity, to get the resources, really to get things going, is to not have this extreme austerity, but really to use existing resources. It's really ironic that the way you tell a country, you say, pay me back, but by the way, don't grow.
Yeah.
Make your pie smaller.
Yeah, it's a little bit like debtors' prisons that you had in the UK. You say, pay me back, but by the way, you have to stay in prison, and so you can't earn a living. Well, you can't do that.
We are not allowed to talk about Strauss-Kahn, she told us.
Yeah. Okay. So
You're talking about prison.
I didn't know it was going to be so easy. So we've solved the problem. We all agree, well, at least everyone here agrees, debt restructuring, and probably needs to be more political integration in Europe.
Growth policy.
Growth
policy, and maybe a third thing is in the toolbox, I guess, Eurobonds. The market is not only crying for more money and for more growth, confidence. So I think we should give this confidence to the smaller countries, to the countries which are in trouble now. They are also in trouble not because only of overspending, they're in trouble because there was a severe financial crisis which pushed them over the brink. So we have to give confidence to the market. We tried this with all this European mechanism, stability mechanism, all this. It doesn't work. So I think we have to introduce Eurobonds.
So we do all the things that you're talking about, more integration, hopefully some growth, certainly debt restructuring.
Sorry, I don't agree about more integration.
Well, that's what I was going to come back to. I was going to ask you because I think, you know, what kind of, if you're in this audience, you know, you've heard this, there's this wonderful family dispute going on, not here, but within Europe, with all these nice kind of charming countries like Greece and Ireland that you didn't focus on very much in the past and you probably won't focus on again. What is the Europe that comes out of that? If we get a message that government debt's going to be restructured and that Europe is going to be more integrated, I mean, Simon, are you worried by the Europe that would come out of this, even if the political solution was found and we did all the things that are being discussed?
I'm very worried about it. I'll tell you why I'm worried about it. I'm worried that, and I think, Gabor, you expressed it brilliantly, that the economic crisis is used as an excuse for political integration that is wanted by a group of people who sit on the top of Europe, but isn't wanted by the people of any European nation. And my view is that prosperity doesn't come from enforced political integration. Prosperity comes from freedom, free trade, people being able to move as they wish, but the idea that we need the same political master and that somehow we need some superstructure that governs the people of Europe is one that is not only bad for our political freedom, but is also ultimately will be bad for our economy. Because what the people sitting in this layer don't seem to understand is that economics doesn't dance to the tune of a political bandmaster. It never has done. You can't force economies to do what you want just because you have the political will. And that has been the enormous mistake of the whole European project has been built on that foundation, and it's simply wrong.
David, I think Ireland is being pressured as part of this closer family and the bailout, or whatever you would call it, to raise its corporation tax. So what message does that send?
This is the Sarkozy approach, okay? Which is that in some way in his head, there is a relationship between a banking crisis and the Irish corporate tax rate. Now, there ain't no relationship. And even if we put our corporate tax rate up to 100%, it still wouldn't make the banks any better.
Okay.
Think about it. So what you have what you have in the case of Ireland is, a small country being bullied by a rather large country, which sets up a straw man argument, okay, which we then have to devote resources to try defeating. And what would make Ireland immeasurably weaker is if our corporation tax rate was raised. So what the French are arguing is, we will make you, not only will we impose austerity on you, we will actually make you weaker commercially, and in so doing, you will be able to pay the money.
Joe, before you can I just ask, Gabor, just your response to that. Is there any defence for Germany and France using this opportunity to get Ireland to jack up its corporation tax rate? Would you defend that?
I think Ireland has to learn it the hard way, that there's no shortcut to paradise, and to be a tax safe haven for corporations is not enough as a growth model for a whole country, even if it's a small country. Hard work is needed, not only investing in this kind of tricky politics. I think to be a safe haven has proven wrong. It could be part of a solution if you have to work through a different period, which you obviously have done, but it's part of the toolbox. It could not be the main argument for a country that you have low corporate taxes and I call you a sinner state. You are punished by the markets, not by Germans. You're punished by the markets for that.
I think the point that Simon made, that you don't need political integration for economic integration, has to be qualified. The fact is, the question is, what is fair competition? And if you have one country engaged in unfair tax competition, unfair, deteriorating health standards, environmental standards, not having global warming, doing anything about global warming, polluting the rest. That's not you might say you could have free trade, but it will be a race to the bottom, and one which really undermines our standards of living. So there has to be certain, I think, common standards that you have to take on board. And the question is, where do those common standards have to be? You don't want to have everything regulated, and I think that's what you're worried about, that they're gone too far. On the other hand, I have some sympathy with the view that tax poaching is an unfair way of competing, to say that we're going to try to attract companies by getting lower and lower corporation taxes. What you want to do is attract people by having high education, good infrastructure, all the kinds of things that improve standards of living. And the Irish approach has been one which overall has not been constructive for, I think, globalization. I mean, we've had, in the United States, as an example, one American drug company does its research in the United States, but all the patents are held in Ireland. And they try to claim that all their profits were coming, for a few people working in Ireland, generated all the profits of this major.
No, we agree with this.
We succeeded in getting that one. But that's the kind of thing that is going on.
As an Irish citizen, we pay very high income tax to working corporations that pay no tax. So that actually annoys us as well. But the point is, do you overnight raise the Irish tax rate, in so doing possibly prompt capital flight, which makes the country weaker? Or do you say, over the next 5 or 6 years, we're going to get our act together? But on the big European issue of integration or none, what is interesting, if you look at the last 4 referenda on European integration, one in Netherlands, one in France, 2 in Ireland, they've all been defeated. The people of Europe do not want further integration when asked. And the European elite, the insiders at the top, have got to figure out a way of getting around that. Because ultimately, the way the European Union, which is a deeply democratic institution, not the ECB, the EU, they're going to have to go via plebiscite, via referenda. And every time you ask the citizens, whether they're German, well, the Germans have French or Dutch or Irish, they say we don't. We say, yeah, you're exactly
Never
clever.
asked.
We don't want it. And
Too
that's
dangerous.
I knew the problem with this. I knew the problem with this session was not going to be getting everyone to talk, but to get you all to shut up in time to have some Q&A. And I know that there will be people who want to ask questions. If you go up to the mics, we've got about 10 minutes.
Since I work for an American company, sorry, Colin Gottlieb, or Omnicom Media Group. Since I work for an American company, I'll use Stephanie's classic line of some people may say. Isn't the debate kind of academic as far as the European experiment, in that with the United States sort of delivering something like $4 billion of debt each day, sitting on about $13 trillion of debt, and from QE 653 deliberately creating a lot of inflation and therefore debasing the dollar, allegedly. And with China, on the other hand, a huge market, growing at something like 10% a year. Isn't Europe, and especially Germany, and the market that I look after, the markets I look after, just going to get squashed? And therefore, effectively, this debate between the United States and China, that there will be default in Europe. So the question is, with America driving high inflation and debasing the dollar, allegedly, and China, on the other hand, with a rampant growth at 10%, isn't the conversation kind of academic?
Joe, do you think? Does Europe sort of shrink into insignificance as a
Yeah, I mean, I think one has to go back to what are the real assets. The real assets have nothing to do with these liabilities, these debts. The real assets are the people, the capital goods, the technology. And the real assets before you had the euro crisis are the same as you had before, after the euro crisis are the same as before. And that's really what the issue is. It's restructuring the debt so you get past this thing that has strangled you. And because the irony is that the credit, these liabilities are just something that has come in the way of using the resources efficiently. And if you could just figure out how to restructure it, you could go back to using these resources efficiently. From the political point of view, if I look at the problems in the United States, maybe we all are most pessimistic about what we see all the time. I see the problems in the United States, the gridlock there, as equally serious, of a different form than in Europe. So the good news for Europe is that these problems are universal.
Are there any more? I just want to go up to the mic. And then, we might actually take a couple. No, you want to go? We'll take these two. If you say who you are.
Yeah. Hello. Good morning. My name is José Manuel Vargas. I come from Vocento, Spain, a potential sinner. And I have two questions. The first question is: I think Spain shows that what you were talking about. The bailout of the financial system is very clear because Spain has got a debt GDP ratio of just 70%, right? So, but it's under the pressure of the markets because the Spanish financial system has a lot of debt with the international financial system because they have financed all the housing growth of the country, right? The first question is, I think that the problem of Spain is that the world has decided after the Lehman Brothers crisis that no state can leave its financial system, right? So would we have any alternative of solving the problems without bailing out our financial system and accordingly not having our public debt under pressure because we have a low GDP debt ratio, right? The second question is, I think that what you were talking about it's a global problem. It's not a European Union problem, right? It happened the same in the United States, but the United States and the UK decided to solve this through inflation, through quantitative easing, right, during the last years, while in Europe, because of the traditional fear of Germany to inflation, we have decided to solve it through real terms devaluation, right? Do you think that we can avoid inflation through that, because what we have seen is that in raw materials, inflation is appearing, and it's transferring that to all countries in Europe. So despite the effort we have made and we are making in avoiding inflation, we are suffering inflation in every country in Europe, and we are starting to suffer. So at the end of the day, is it possible to maintain two different types of solution for a global crisis, such as we are seeing with the US and Germany? Thanks.
And Lionel as well.
The editor of the Financial Times. I had a specific question for Gabor. You've invoked Helmut Kohl's vision of the bloody birth, difficult birth of the United States of Europe. But I wonder whether you've seriously addressed the genuine German dilemma, which is this. The natural monetary union was the hard core built around France and Germany and articulated 15 years ago by the now current German Finance Minister Wolfgang Schäuble. But you ended up with a monetary union in which there were several sinners, or would be future sinners. So your dilemma is either you go back to the natural monetary union, the hard core that can live with a highly competitive Germany, or you suck it up and you realize that you've actually going to end up with a transfer union in which German taxpayers are going to have to support the weaker brethren or sinners.
Okay, well, do you want to respond to that, and then we'll go back to the other
I think
question?
no way out. The Germans will cling to their stability culture, and if you push them too hard to leave this tradition, they would skip every government. So we have to live with that, and there is no 100% solution. I think we have already started to live in a transfer union. What do we see? All these kind of helping programs. Right now they are discussing a new package for Portugal and for Greece, and we are talking about double-digit amounts of money. And so we are already part of this transfer union, and the Germans, even if they don't feel that comfortable, they don't want to step out of this union. Always, we have one track but two speeds. Mr. Schäuble and Mr. Kohl, they were always talking about the European community of a two-speed society. And we are in this, and I think it's nothing bad about that. We need different speeds. Europeanism is not communism. We are not all equal. And we can live with some sinners if they are not in the majority. And we have to, in quotes, to educate them now. The EZB and Mr. Draghi, we have a lot of key people on key positions to educate these governments, these budget planners, to make it in a serious way, that Europe will not be destroyed by too much fantasy and too much vision. We can't afford this. We need a down-to-earth politics right now, and then I think we can make it.
Can we, I know you want to respond to that, but also to respond to the Spanish question. Do you want to?
Yeah, let me try to link the two. First, Spain made it so clear that the framework for thinking about what is good and stable that prevailed before the crisis, the Maastricht Convention, was totally wrong. They said that if you had surpluses, if you met the debt-GDP ratios, you would be safe. Spain did that. And they weren't. They made a fundamental mistake. The mistake was they listened to the neoliberal ideas that said you could get away with bank deregulation and those kinds of things. But in terms of the macroeconomics, they did everything right. So you can't criticize them. So the kinds of frameworks that are being pushed by Germany and others are not going to be the answer. They're actually contributing to the problem. In my mind, inflation is one way of dealing with it because it restructures the debt, it brings it down, but it's not likely to be acceptable in the current framework. So the only alternative is restructuring. And restructuring is a way of not shifting it onto the government's books. In the US, we didn't need to shift all the debt on the government's books. We could have put it more on the bondholders and the shareholders of the banks. And it was, you might say, a deliberate decision done by the bankers. What you described as a coup d'etat, they did it, And we now wound up with a lot bigger burden, but it was basically a political act, a result of the influence of the bankers on, at that critical period in the crisis.
We've run out of time, but Simon, just a quick
Well,
response.
I think the second question answered the first question. You know, is there an alternative? Well, the answer is a transfer union where the richer countries keep bailing out the poorer countries. The question that really about that is, at what point do they stop bailing them out? Because if the poorer countries say, actually, we don't want to play by your rules, you know, because the only way you're going to actually have a transfer union is by having rules imposed on the poorer countries, which are essentially austerity measures. And what happens when you get the Greeks rioting and the Greek police and the Greek army say, we're not going to fire on our own people? What are you going to do about it, Germany? And you then end up with a real political crisis.
This is quite, like, I mean, it's interesting, the Spanish, and it's funny you started with morality and sinners. You know, an English friend of mine said to me, look, it's just you and the Irish and the Portuguese and the Spanish, it's all the Catholics screwing up. And I think, you know, you can look at this in the Catholic way or a Protestant way, okay? The Catholic way is confession, and bless me, Father, I have sinned, and we'll do the right thing, and it's all good. And the Protestant way is there's a moral obligation on you to right your ways. So I believe that you can, but I think what I
love the second.
all these things are not just economic; they are deeply, deeply cultural, deeply cultural. And Joe is right. If we don't get inflation, which you guys don't want, okay, fair enough. You've got to do something else, because the alternatives do nothing, and we get back to the top is at the end of the EU. That becomes plausible. So we've got to do something.
Yeah. I'm struck, we have to wind up now, but I'm struck by, I have a very strong feeling that a year ago I was sitting on this platform and we were talking about going back from the brink in the global financial system, and I started with this old line about, you know, capitalism without default is like Christianity without hell. And we sort of ended up in the same place, that all this morality, all these questions of sinners and default and Catholicism, not really where I expected to end up, but, you know, I'll go with it. But thank you very much to everyone for what was very lively discussion, and I hope was interesting to everyone here.